Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller, and in this demonstration we're going to take some of the knowledge that we have learned and accumulated and put them into a little bit of a practical use. Throughout this process we're going to learn how to create some data, modify some data, and then interact with kind of the desktop and dragging and dropping. We're going to submit the data to workflows and see a little bit about how that interacts, and then that'll transition us into actually diving into workflows a little bit further. As we go through this, we're going to try and highlight everything we can with regards to the creation of that data. But just note that we don't have all of the different bells and whistles that could potentially be installed. So at your site, pay attention to those process-based instructions that make it a little bit different than what the out-of-the-box is. To begin with, what we're going to do is just talk about creating data. So when you create data inside of the system, just a very basic way, if you've got a task to create a change or a revision of some sort, a change is a type of revision, then you need to just locate the place that you can interact with it first. And that Explorer that we've been kind of highlighting is going to be that place. So the Explorer is going to have the home folder. It's where we've created a component already. And where I like to create things is in this new stuff folder. Now, if you wanted to, just to kind of organize this a little bit more, you could come in and say new and create or add a folder by default. And what you'll see a lot of different types of folders. The type that you want to be able to create is just folder. And then once you do that, you can call this test data or whatever you want it to be named. Then I can choose add to add that folder in. So now you can drag any components that were already in the new stuff folder, drag and drop them, and notice that test data turns blue. So that means it's going to drop inside of it. So I'll drop it on that folder, and now it'll refresh to show me that it's created a shortcut to that data in that folder as well. Now I can always come up to this top one, right click and choose cut to remove that reference afterward. So drag and drop works, cut and paste works. I could right click and choose paste. Just note that if I tried to paste it on it again, it is going to identify that that is already there. So you can't have duplicates of the same data in the folder. So I've got this data here and I've created it, but I'm going to go ahead and create something new. So in this case, I've got a task to come in and create one of our essential revision objects. This object is eventually going to get a release status on it. It's just a document. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say new. So I'm going to say ... new, add. Notice I could create a change. It's going to work the same way. Or I could create a report. It's either one of them is going to create a little panel up for us. So I'm going to just choose add. That'll give me the ability to create almost anything except for changes. And then I'm going to say I want to create a new part or document. Let's do document. So I'm going to create a new document here. And I'm going to give it a name. This is going to be my specification document. Basically, it's just going to have some essential information that's going to have a requirement link eventually to something else. And then notice I have some additional fields I could fill out. So this is specification and details for aircraft. So I could say who the author is and then what the subject of the document is, and then I could also just pick a workflow if I had one available to submit this to. And then I need to choose the file of that. So I'm going to choose the file. And in this case, I could just go to my downloads. I've got some different Excel documents, my new part. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that, hit open. And then I could add it to a project down here if I wanted to, just kind of group it up into a bucket that has its own security. But in this case, I'm just going to click add. Now, I could also use my palette or search to find existing data, but I'm just going to click add here to add this in. So that will have created my new document in the scope of that folder, but typically we want the document to be in an item revision. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to say cut, and I want this to be a part of my new component. So I'm going to go into my attachments on that component, and this helps describe that it's a document. So I'm going to come in and paste it under the documents section here in this page. So now I've got it along with the other data that helps define it all in one place. So you could have come just directly to the documents and chose add at that point, and notice only certain things can be added in this place. So where you have your cursor selected to create something is very important in what you can create. So I could create another one this way. Just note that if you wanted to put the file in here, you could just go to the operating system and then drag that file over to the display. See how it turns blue? And then you've got it. So that's an easier way to kind of do that. And then you can fill out everything. If you wanted to cut the dialog and the button clicks all together, you could drag and drop the file directly to the table. So if I come in, you want to hover over the header of the table. It'll take a second to click, and if you can add it, it will let you. Notice this one allows me to add it in. It turned blue. And notice this one doesn't. So the default paste relationship for this type of information isn't going to allow me to paste it to documents until I get down into here. Notice that what I'm doing now, this one highlighted the whole table. This one only highlighted that object. So if I drop it on this object, it's not going to play nice. If I select this table and add it to the files list, notice it adds as an MS Excel file, and this down here doesn't allow for those types of files. So there are rules and logic in place, and those may be a little different at your site. But that's how I can create some file data pretty fast. If you want to see the file data, typically I would recommend selecting it and choosing Open in New Tab or Open in New Window. And that way you can see the file data. It will open up, and if you have some sort of an Office integration, you may see it here. Otherwise, you'll see the revision that references it, and then you could come over to the information on the right, and you can download it if you look through here. It might be under View or Share. There it is. So download, and then you could download the file to your operating system. But just note, the moment you download it, it's no longer the live data, the master data, and you should probably compare it to the master data before importing it back in. Now, if I have a file that's open and I want to replace the file, say I don't have some sort of Office integration to just save it, then you can come in and you can choose Edit and then choose Replace File if you have permissions to do so. Notice I don't have it checked out. I can just do this. I'm going to click Replace File, select File, and then I'll just pick one of the other ones. Then I'll choose Replace, and it will update the file in that data set for me. Now, each subsequent save of the file, each time I've saved it or modified it, you can view those by coming into View, Show Dataset Versions. So you can see that the latest edition of this file is version number 2. The older one is this. It's kind of like a Control-Z. You have the older value until a keep limit is hit, and typically that's set to 3. So this will store off 3 versions of that file, and you can get old versions back with a limited reference. You can also go to named references, and this is kind of a more elaborate thing that you can get into, but this is the actual pointer to the file in the volume, whereas the data you're looking at here is more of a database representation of the file that includes a pointer to the actual file. So this is, like I said, this is a little bit more robust for you super users taking the courses. But when you select an older version, just note you can download the version at the bottom, or you can choose to roll it back and restore this version. So data sets are fairly easy to add. Just drag and drop them to the location they need to go. Make sure you're adding it to the right spot. But you can also create, if we go back to Explorer, revision objects fairly easily. Same process, just go into New, Add, and then do a part. I'm going to create a new part, but notice it gives you an ID. So sometimes you might have multiple ID options, so pay attention to that. It'll generate the next ID in sequence. So if the next ID is 27, I'll get 27. But the naming rules for these IDs could be different. You may have a whole different format of ID that gets generated for you. Same with the revision IDs. You can do major and minor revisioning schemas. So it could be A01, A02B, it could be dashes. Kind of the sky's the limit there. And then the name, this is going to be the object name. So I'm going to call this bolt for assembly. And then I'll come down. This is unit of measure for the assembly. It pre-populates all these different unit of measure types. So if you're measuring this out in inches, millimeters, centimeters, whatever be the case, it'll be available. Is there a design required for this object or not? So that's going to basically dictate you have to open it up in some form or fashion of CAD and create the requirement for that. So I'm going to say no. And then down below, I can say what the finish type is for it and whether or not I'm purchasing it or producing it. Always the option to add projects. Click add and you'll be able to create that component. It'll add in, and at that point you'll get the details for it. So once I get the bolt for assembly created in here, then I can go through and I can begin to add the components. In my case, I didn't want to create this. I really wanted to come in and modify this one because it already has the files I want. So in this case, if I come in, I may want to delete this object, and I'll come in here and choose edit, and notice there isn't a way to delete it. Your administrators can provide deletion permissions to you, but there isn't really a way to do it out of the box. So if you need to delete an object, I recommend putting it into a folder in your home folder and telling your administrator that you've messed up and that you need to remove this object. The reason for that is if it has any associated data, you will have to delink all of the data before you can delete it. Now, again, some sites do get that delete permission, and if you do have to delete it, you would have to come in and cut all of these references out of it and then delete it. And just the fact that it is sitting in the home folder may cause it to not be able to be deleted. So I would even cut it out of the home folder and then go search for it and delete it. So in here, we don't have the permissions, so I'm just going to be using this in my new part, but I want to go ahead and edit it. So I'm going to choose Overview, Edit, and now I can edit it. I'm going to call this bolt for assembly. So same name as the other one, but the ID is the unique identifier in the system, so that's okay. And I'm actually just going to cut this other one, and I'm going to paste it into the new stuff folder, and I'm going to eventually put it in a junk folder that my admins will know to clean up. So now I've got my bolt for assembly in my test data folder, as well as in my new stuff. I'll just go ahead and cut that out completely, otherwise I'll be submitting the wrong thing. And now we have some data that's been built up. So typically at this point, once you've got some data in it, sometimes you even submit to a workflow before you do that. But at this point, you need a stamp of approval. So you've built this data, you've attached everything you need to attach, and now you need to send it off on its way to get the approvals it needs to get to the shop floor or wherever it needs to go. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and say manage and then submit to workflow. So if it's a PDF and you have digital signature capabilities, you could sign it, you could pin it to home, you could change the owner of this data to somebody else. It's not yours. Either way, if you submit it to the workflow though, then you get a list of workflows that are available. And in this case, I have an additional option that allows me to switch and see all workflows in my system. Otherwise, I have no workflow directly assigned for me with this object type. If you are logging into this and you only get the template name, that means that your administrators have locked that down. So in my case though, I'm going to switch it to all, and then I can see all of the workflows in the system that I could submit to. You may only see one workflow and you may not be able to change between them. But in here, I can submit to general ones. So in this process, I'm just going to come down and find one of the ones that I use called a requirement sign-off. So if I come in here, I can select my workflow, give it a name. This will be reflected in logs and other elements. And then I can see my object is a target. That just means that the object is the subject of that workflow. There are two different types of targets or attachments. You have targets and references are just kind of supporting documentation. You don't necessarily want it to get a status on it like approved or obsolete, but you definitely want it to be available so that people don't have to search. Whatever be the case, the workflow can also attach children and check to see if something is checked in. So you may get little warnings about those. And then typically you would just hit submit here. But if you have a more elaborate workflow, you could go to assignments and then pick the different steps in the workflow and assign individual groups or maybe buckets where people could look at them and assign them to themselves. They're called resource pools. We'll get into those a little bit more with the workflow overview, but in here, if I choose workflow, basically it's just going to send it back to me whenever I need to pick somebody for a task. I'm going to choose submit here, and then it will submit this object into the workflow. It'll tell me about it, and then you'll notice I get an additional tab now on the object, and I can go into the workflow tab and see where it is in that workflow, as well as, if I have permissions and it's my task, the ability to perform the task. So we'll dive more into workflows as we get deeper and deeper into this Active Workspace interface. But we hope that you've learned a little bit more about the ability to create data inside of Active Workspace, where you should create it, how to interact with data that's on the operating system, and just kind of a general overview of managing and creating that data.